should we let roll with this intro and then see where it takes us?
Let's do it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this installment of Drunk Dramaturgy. I am Brent Hazelton, Milwaukee Chamber Theater's artistic director. With me, as always, is faithful and charming co-host Kimberly Colburn, former literary manager at Actors Theater of Louisville, literary director at South Coast Rep, and now an expatriate hiding out in the wilds of Toronto, Canada. And with us for this episode, we are so delighted and excited to have with us David Jacobi. David is a playwright, MFA from the University of San Diego, has held commissions from the Denver Center and South Coast Rep. You probably know him for his play, Ready, Steady, Yeti, Go. David, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. Before we jump into this, what are we all drinking tonight? Co-host Colburn, what do you got?
I have an Aku Aku Lapu in a Yoda tiki mug.
David, what's your beverage?
My beverage tonight is I'm finishing up this bottle of Josh Rosé wine from down the street. Shout out to my boy from grad school, Josh Grobin.
And I will be enjoying one of our finest domestics here in the state of Wisconsin, a New Glarus Brewing Spotted Cow.
Ooh.
Before we get into this, David, I forgot to mention, if you had to rate the importance of Kimberly Colburn in the hierarchy of American...
I'm cutting this.
This day in Drunk Dramaturgy is going to be dedicated to the life and times of Vaclav Havel, one of the arguably most influential playwrights of all time. So I'm going to tell you about him. All right, so Vaclav Havel, born in 1936 in Czechoslovakia. He's born to a bourgeoisie family. He's definitely bougie. Like, this is right around the time where Czechoslovakia got Nazi Germany out. And things are looking up for little boy Václav Havel until one day, communism. Once again, it's the environment he grew up in. After World War II, Czechoslovakia was one of the most industrialized countries in that region. People were just like, hey, we have all these mines and equipment. Let's start leaning a little more into capitalism and start making that cheddar. But what happened was the communists in parliament, and at that time, the communists made up a minority in the government. They were like, if we had left-wing rule over Czechoslovakia, this could galvanize not only communism here, but all around the continent. Like, this could have rippling effects. It'd be pretty dope. So what they did was the worst possible way to go about it. They just busted into parliament and were like, we're communists now. Get over it. And then one day, Vaclav is in school, and suddenly Czechoslovakia is a one-party communist state. My Josh Rosé went down the wrong pipe.
Yes, that's what happened. So now I'm going to actually say my question because I remembered it,
Yes.
which is, seriously, like, literally overnight, one day to the next?
They just busted in. They're like, we're the minority, but now we're just running everything. They did. And at that time, there were a lot of like disenfranchised people living in the country, peasant farmers, peasant miners, and they had enough, and like their economic troubles weren't really being looked at. I mean, this is post-war Czechoslovakia, so like a lot of people got left by the side. Someone picked them up and like, wouldn't it be cool if we just took over the government and we became this communist utopia we were always meant to be? The new totalitarian communist Czechoslovakia does is they do a purge. Now, this is a 250,000 of people, 250,000 souls are put on trial, and a lot of them are put on TV. The people that suffer the most initially aren't the right wing, or aren't people super opposed to communists. The people most in danger at this time are actually the democratic socialists, the people who are usually sort of aligned, or at least neighbors to the communists. But because they're close enough to them, but speak a message that the ruling party is not cool with, they're getting purged. Like, now is the time for the left to represent one voice and not a bunch of differing variations. So democratic socialists are getting it the worst. Anyway, but she had no life in theater, so we're just gonna move on from her right now.
Okay.
And go back to-
I was kind of curious, like, so how does Vaclav, like, she's getting executed, communism is taking over, and he decides life in the theater.
Well, yeah, right around this time, he is a young man who is taking odd jobs, because even though he comes technically from the middle class, from the bourgeoisie, the government at the time, it's not enough that they then put people from the country and people who usually just didn't have a lot of money into positions of power, into positions of wealth, and giving them property. Havel has less options. He ends up having a really underwhelming, insufficient childhood education. He's denied access to college. He eventually enrolls in a technical institute, but drops out. Throughout all this, from this, he grows a sense of intellectual inadequacy that haunts him for the rest of his life. He takes on a bunch of menial jobs throughout his life while taking night classes in a gymnasium, until one day he lands a job as a stagehand in the local theater.
Oh, the theater.
The theater. The theater. And he loves it. He loves the shit out of it. He loves doing theater. He's like, I gotta go to college. I gotta learn more about theater, but they won't let me in. So here's his switch. Here's his trick. He enrolls in the Academy of Performing Arts in Prague. The way he gets around it is that he's only a student through letter correspondence with the professors. So he takes online classes in 1960 something through snail mail, and that's how he learns about theater.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Yeah, he's resourceful. He's a resourceful guy, and he's cool. So it's the 1950s, and Havel becomes immersed in a very particular breed of plays, theater of the absurd.
What? No, that's absurd.
It's absurd.
Absurdist plays are plays that focus on the meaninglessness of human existence, often in a humorous way.
So his first play he writes is The Garden Party. And it's about a young man who is hopelessly unemployed and living with his parents. And one day his parents set him up with a job interview. But due to scheduling conflicts, the job interview will be at an office party. So he goes to the interview, and he's just at the party, and he's surrounded by all the employees who are chit-chatting, and they're all mindless losers who speak in platitudes and cliches, and they just speak in a bureaucratic nonsense. By the end of the play, the young man is now the manager, but he can no longer communicate with his parents because now he speaks in a gibberish language that they can't understand.
Yes, I've worked in an office before.
Yeah, we've all been temps. We get it. Which really, all of Havel's plays had to do with Czechoslovakia and his situation. Like his second play, Memorandum, was his biggest success to date. It was his second play. And that's what put him on the map, because that was the play that got a production at the Public Theater. And it introduced America to the work of Vaclav Havel. How was a minority slice of Czechoslovakia allowed to take control? And the answer to that question is dudes. Angry dudes. So here's what you have. You have a bunch of people who at times have legitimate gripes. And then you go up to them and say, hey, I'm going to give you everything you want. I'm gonna give you everything you want. And I'm going to punish people you don't like. And that's what really gets the chuds. And I'm going to call them chuds forever. What the government was doing was called, for a while, Czechoslovakia was being called the Kingdom of Forgetting. It's actually like, I skipped ahead. That comes next. But what happens in 1968 is the Prague Spring. What happens in the government is this communist-run government, some social democrats get mixed in there, and some a little more right-leaning folks. And they're just like, hey, communism, this is supposed to be cool. It's supposed to be fun. And it's supposed to take care of everybody. Why don't we chill out a little bit? Why don't we stop being like our own angry stepdad? And what happens is Czechoslovakia goes from a country that is communist, but trying to kind of like smooth that out a little bit, to all of a sudden, once again, overnight, because tanks roll in, they go from communist leaning towards mild communism to way more communist. Like they were like, can we have a little bit of like Lenin? And they're like, no, how about Stalin? Like now the tanks are in the street, because it's just like, it just comes to just like, how fast do we want to do this? And Stalinist Russia is just like as fast as possible, no matter who dies. Cool thing that happens is that this Soviet communism comes with like really good art, like amazing art. Like they pump so much money into visual arts, performing arts. Like just look it up. Look up Czechoslovakia in the 1960s, and you're gonna see some like dope, creepy, like spider art. Like they had like dancers running at each other full speed in a stadium and creating like choreography with like 5,000 people. It's like North Korea times 10. Like they were really doing it. One of the coolest things they ended up doing was spaghetti Western. They were making movies, and they made a really popular Western about this gunslinger named Lemonade Joe. And the whole movie was this guy, this gunslinger, was coming into towns and not shooting people and taking over. He was there to get the town hooked on Coca-Cola. Look up Lemonade Joe, you'll find it. Anyway, during this time, all of Havel plays are banned. He's not allowed to leave the country. He can't go to the public theater and see his plays, because at that time, the public is like, we're doing more of his plays.
But he's important enough to be banned at this point. He's
important enough to be banned. They're banning a lot of people, and that ends up being a big mistake, because this is where the Soviets fucked up, because you get this guy, Vaclav Havel, who now has nothing to do. Because of his background, he is enjoyed and respected by working class people who are his coworkers, and also the intelligentsia of like family, friends, and like dope people, and he still consumes the arts. And now that he can't get his plays produced, he's got a ton of spare time. So he starts working in a brewery, and with his free time, he gets into political activism. And this is where he meets other artists that have fallen under the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. And this is where he meets the plastic people of the universe.
The plastic people.
Of the universe.
Plastic people of the universe.
The plastic people of the universe. Now, these are a bunch of dudes who got really into Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. They were part of the subculture in Czechoslovakia called the Manika. And that's blue jeans, long hair, moccasin-wearing music snobs. You see them walking around to this day. We call them hipsters, but back then in Czechoslovakia, they're called Manika. And the plastic people of the universe are the hottest band in Czechoslovakia, being played on pirate radio. Because as soon as the coup happened, public radio and the TV networks, they all went dark and started popping around like You Can't Catch and playing like Hot Potato, so they couldn't be caught. And this band is super popular in Dutch. during that time. And Havel, this middle-aged dude rocking a mustache and wearing sweaters all the time, he is embraced by this subculture of hipsters, and he's embraced by the plastic people of the universe, who then get arrested, and a couple of them are forced to move to Canada. They're sentenced to life in Canada, which is a great punishment.
What a great punishment!
It's a great punishment, but if you really love Czechoslovakia, it's a bad punishment.
Yeah, that does suck.
If you have a family in Czechoslovakia, it's a rough punishment. And for the lead singer, it was a rough punishment. So the plastic people get sent to Canada, and Havel's pissed. All right. Oh, at this time, right, of Soviet rule, is where shit gets really crazy. The government built a house next to Havel's house, kind of on his property, actually. It's this like tin piece of shit house with just government people in it. And their full-time job is to just watch Havel, everything he does, and report on it. Havel's still writing plays, but he can't bring them home with him. Also, and here's some interesting part of theater history, at this time, his plays are getting more and more popular in Czechoslovakia, whether or not they're produced, because people are making copies of them and distributing them illegally, and they're getting performed by families in their own home. Because back then, when your friend asked you what you're going to do for the weekend, and you said, "Oh, I'm going to catch up reading some plays," you actually meant it, and you weren't lying. So they're reading all these plays. These plays are getting very popular. Their families is just doing them because like they don't really have TVs yet in Czechoslovakia. They do, but they don't. It's like a bougie thing. So plays are still the thing. Until one day the police, walk up to Havel and they're like, "Hey, buddy, we just read your new play. We got some notes for you. And our note is, why don't you pack up all your shit and get the fuck out?" And Havel is like, that was prescriptive. I think I'm going to do what I've always been doing, which is just stay here and write plays that Joe Papp loves and you hate. And they're like, "Are you sure about that? Because if you don't get out right now, we're just going to throw you in prison." And Havel thought, and you know what? And he just like, and because Vaclav's cool, I have glasses for effect here. He just puts on his glasses and he says, "Do it, fine. I like going to prison." And they send Havel to prison for 4.5 years. I didn't read about this. I don't know about his time in prison, but I imagine it sucks.
Prison.
But prison. It's prison in Czechoslovakia. I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't read. So yeah, he comes out, and the first thing he does is he starts Charter 77. He writes a manifesto alongside the plastic people of the universe that pretty much just like explains all their gripes with the communist government. Shit, what's happening? What happens then? And then he goes, they come up to him again and they're like, "You didn't learn anything." And here's how, I'm just making up this conversation, but it probably went like this. They're just like, "You're making us mad." He's like, "I don't care." He's like, "What are you going to do now? We're just going to throw you in prison again." And Vaclav Havel goes, "I'm going to start a revolution." Great. Like, are you ready? Because like we've got a kick-ass army. He's like, no, don't get me wrong. No one's going to get hurt. The government's like, "You're going to have a revolution in which nobody gets hurt." And he's like, "Yeah, it's going to be crazy. I'm just going to tell you what it is, and you're not going to be able to stop it." And he's like, "This is impossible." Vaclav Havel says to the communist government, it's like, "I'm going to start a revolution with my artist friends that you will not be able to stop. No drops of blood will be spilled, and at the end of the month, you will be dead." And the communist government says, "Well, what are you going to call it?" And he says, I'm going to call it the Velvet Revolution. A revolution consisting of no violence, of only general strikes. It starts with only theaters and theater professionals who decide to general strike. They're like, the theater's closed, which back then was a bigger deal than it would be now. And they're like, theater's closed. It's open, but only for debate and political conversation. Otherwise, we're not putting on Ibsen, we're not putting on Shakespeare, we're not putting on Havel. We're just having talks right now. If you want to come and get to an argument with somebody about communism versus capitalism and the current state of the government, come on board. Otherwise, fuck off. We're closed. Which is really an alpha move for any theater that I just wish would do it today. By the end of the Velvet Revolution, by the end of those 3 weeks, everybody for 2 hours one day stopped working and the economy collapsed and the government gave in and they held an election and Václav Havel became the next president of Czechoslovakia.
That's fucking crazy.
For the first time ever, it was cool to like a politician and everyone was like glomming on to Havel. Because he was this like punk rock dude who's hanging out with plastics who got shit-faced every night. He was just this dude getting shit-faced with everybody and like everyone's getting their pitch taken. Like, he is the last president of Czechoslovakia. But then he becomes the first president of the Czech Republic, which is crazy. His presidency overall is mediocre. There's been a motto that's been falsely attributed to Havel, but I'm going to give it to him anyway. And it is this. He's like, follow the man who is looking for the truth. Run away from the man who claims that he found it. And I think that encapsulates Havel in a nutshell. Like this guy who maybe wasn't the best president, but at the moment he was the right president. And that's why he got elected twice, is because like it made sense. And yeah, America and capitalism like used his image and falsely, kind of like what they're doing now in Venezuela, which is another conversation. But like, he believed like, it doesn't matter if you're communist or capitalist. If you don't have everyone's interests at heart, if you're not taking care of everybody, there's no fucking point. Like, there's no point unless you're letting people grow as human beings. So even though he kind of takes a more liberal approach to economics and he pushed Czechoslovakia away, towards the right rather than stay mired in the left, like he ended on some good, like I'd call him like a deep democratic socialist. Don't at me if I'm wrong. But he was definitely to the right of communism.
What is Havel's legacy as both either a playwright or a politician? What did his Velvet Revolution amount to?
I think his Velvet Revolution amounted to like not necessarily having the answer, but knowing when to say this ain't it. I think that that's really what the Velvet Revolution really represented. This idea that like, maybe we should just keep looking. Like maybe we shouldn't settle. And maybe we should always be trying to improve as many of us as possible and treating all of us with dignity. Because when we treat some of us with dignity and not others, we're completely failing.
I mean, I think on that note.
Yeah.
Thank you, David Jacobi.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God,
thank you, Vaclav Havel.
Applause for that story. Well
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really I really didn't want to fuck this up.
Nailed it.